We're going live, we're going live, going live. Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. The next, I would like to next presenter, Jason Maynard. First of all, I want to say he's like speaking, consecutive third year in the row, and that's kind of an achievement in itself. So thank you, Jason, for speaking. So I would kind of go through the Jason's introduction. So Jason Maynard has been architecting, designing, and deploying security technologies that secure the most complex computing environments for almost 2 decades. His understanding of technologies, people, and process enable him to deliver effective, comprehensive security solutions that align to an organization's security goals and strategic imperative. Jason is adept at addressing a range of risk profile across industry vertical skills he cultivated as an end user security practitioner, partner, integrator, and now manufacturer as senior technical solution architect cybersecurity for Cisco system. Jason is also active in direct community speaking at BC Aware Privacy and Security Conference, and as I mentioned before, he delivered sessions all the B most of the BSide I think in Canada. Jason also hold like over 75 plus designations. That's a lot, man, across a variety of product and technology, including CCI designations. So Jason going to talk about as you can see on the screen. Security knows viruses, but the pandemic introduces new challenges to the security team. So over to you, Jason.
Awesome. Thanks, Harv. And thanks, everyone that's organized BSides. You guys do an amazing job, and kudos to the entire team. So this session should be interesting. If you saw my session last year, you would have seen about taking a step back and looking at it from a different perspective when it comes to securing your organization. We're going to do a little bit of that again. We're going to build on that initial session, but we're going to talk about some of the things that we've seen during the pandemic. I know I don't have video. I'm actually in the Rockies. I got 1,000 millisecond latency link, so video is probably only going to hurt me at this time. But if you want to have a visual, think of me dressed up in a suit, all cleaned up. I'm not shaven. The beard has only gotten longer. But in reality, I'm still in my pajamas, right? But that's the way it is with COVID-19 and 2020, right? All right, so let's talk about the initial focus. So, during the pandemic, every one of us that drives any type of security component within any organization, it was all hands on deck, right? And so we were focused on increasing VPN capacity, right? And that was probably the core of most, if you're a networking engineer or a security practitioner, didn't really matter. It was really trying to keep businesses alive, right? People had to work from home, and we needed to start leveraging and adopting, some of the traditional methods that we use today. And VPN was a big part of that. And a lot of it was centered around VPN licensing and increased capacity. So we work on that head end, and we'd ensure that we've had enough capacity required to satisfy the need. The problem is that after we did that, other supporting infrastructure started to fail, right? And that could be connections per second on switch infrastructure, firewalls, etc. But we've never built the VPN to be able to run the entire business on, right? It wasn't at the forefront. It was always there just in case for a pandemic, but it was really meant to augment certain users that needed the capacity to work away from the office, not to run the entire business on. And so we struggled, and that oversubscription could have been internet circuits, could have been, like I said, switching infrastructure. And then what we did was in order to satisfy this, and again, this sets the framework of why we want to take a step back, is that we started saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we need to offload some capacity. And so this is where we start introducing things like split tunneling, right? We start saying, you know what? Things like SaaS-based services. If we have Office 365 in the cloud, should we backhaul that through a VPN connection just to go back out to the internet? What about things like Netflix? Can we control users accessing those resources? And again, the burden that it would put on our infrastructure if we were to pass it through that VPN tunnel. And so we started shifting some of those applications to go direct or not even come through that internet or that VPN connectivity. Obviously, there's challenges when we start doing that. And then what we did was we started adding web services, right? So we said, well, wait a minute, some users don't even need VPN connectivity. What they need is access to this specific application. And so we may have introduced that to the internet and use native TLS as a security wrapper to give access to certain individuals to these services. And then we extend that beyond that, right? We start looking at SaaS, right? We may have already had some things in the cloud already. The other thing is this may have forced you to move things faster. So you might have had a hybrid exchange environment, right? With Office 365 in the cloud. And so it may have pushed you to move faster to adopt that full cloud-based capability or SaaS-based capability. And then what we've done is we've increased, the amount of users that aren't really used to working from home, right? I mean, I've been working from home, I think, over a decade now. But there's a lot of people that don't outside of IT, right? IT may have had more of that flexibility. But the average user used to go into a brick and mortar type facility and do their day-to-day job. And now we've said, here's a laptop, go home and don't come back, right? And connect. And so we've exposed them to an environment that they were not used to, right? And they're always used to, when they connect inside the organization, there's some security controls that are in place. And so they probably don't realize it, but there's things to make sure that they're safe that may not be in play when you work from home. And so security, right? What about security in all of this, right? Is there an issue? Is there a concern? We've done a good job of giving people access. Quite honestly, it's the biggest proof of concept, I believe, in IT ever, right? Ever. We've forced the entire world almost to say, get out of the office and work from home and use technologies that some users haven't used before at a capacity that we've never seen. So it's been a tremendous trial, and I think it has tremendous impact on how we move forward, right? And you've got to think about this. What about COVID-2, like phase 2? What happens in the fall, right? Do users have to be sent home again, right? Do we have the capacity and that, right? If it has to increase. But not only that, many organizations, I believe, are going to realize that this work from home model actually works. And if it works, then do I need to have brick and mortar, right? Or as much of it, right? And I think the commercial space could be in trouble, moving forward, right? Because of this. So don't believe me, security is a real problem, especially from work from home. So what I've done is I went to, cybersecurity infrastructure security agency like CISA, and I just looked for, elements around COVID and work from home. And I found there's no shortage of threats out there. Actually, we're seeing an increase in threats. And so, again, here's one that talks about COVID-19 loan relief webpage and phishing emails, right? So the threat actor is using COVID-19 to get people to bite, right? You've got, hopefully this doesn't happen today, but you've got, all this video conferencing type technology. And you've got to consider, if somebody jumps into a meeting that shouldn't be in a meeting, is it secure and encrypted? These are all things that we may not have thought about originally when we started onboarding some of our capabilities, right? We were so much in a rush to get the capability in play that we haven't actually taken a step back and really looked at the threat landscape, right? And what it means from work from home. Malicious activity targeting COVID-19 research, vaccine development. So there's a big push to be first, right? And so you've got to think any of these organizations that are doing research around vaccine development are certainly at higher risk at this point in time, right? Whether it be state-sponsored or other, doesn't really matter. The threat is real, right? People want to be first, or countries want to be first with vaccine development. So either they're going to steal intellectual data, or what they're going to do is compromise the data that you have. So the outcomes may not be the outcomes that you would have seen because there was some compromise somewhere. DDoS attacks have increased by 500%, again, because of COVID. One of the elements we've got to think about is that I don't now have to worry about just disrupting your internet as an adversary. Disrupting your internet would cause issues, right? Normally, anything going to the internet would be at risk, right? But usually when you're in a brick and mortar type facility, all of your resources are usually accessible still, right? It's usually not going over that same internet circuit, or it's either backhauled internally or through a dedicated circuit of some sort. And so internally, I have full operations. My teams continue to function. Yes, there might be some disruption, but it's not massive. Now I have to target, all I have to do is target VPN headends as an example, or some web-based service that you're having your users leverage to continue operations. I just have to target that. So it could be a volumetric attack, right? Which means I could, shift traffic to the internet and scrub it, or it could be more service impacting, focusing on a certain service that you're offering and try to impact that service and not worry about trying to saturate your uplinks. But it becomes a tremendous problem with VPN. And here's another alert around enterprise VPN security. And again, it just talks a little bit about some of the elements here, right? As organizations use VPN, right, more vulnerabilities exist. The adversary has adjusted its tactics. It gets a little bit more difficult around patching, right? Because VPN becomes, 100% reliable or required. And so, when do you keep the patch updates now for your VPN? You've got phishing emails that are targeting teleworkers, again, stealing usernames and passwords. If I can get your VPN username and passwords, there's a likelihood that I'll have full access into the organization, right? And so you might say, well, not in my organization. You'd still be restricted based on that user identity. But many organizations may not, right? It depends on how fast you move to get these users onboarded so they can work from home. And then we've got things like, multi-factor authentication. If we're not using it, we're more susceptible to phishing attacks, right? And obviously, I mentioned this one already around, the VPN headend becomes a very critical service to keep operations up, business operations up, that is. And then another one here, again, it just kind of walks through a little bit using COVID now as the theme, as the lure, right? So now you've got phishing that's got COVID-19 elements wrapped around it. You've got malware distribution points. Domains obviously have coronavirus or COVID-19 names in them now. And again, they continue to target. And here's a couple of examples, right? Where malicious Android app provides real-time coronavirus outbreak tracker, right? That sounds usable, right? That's something that I might want, but instead it downloads, and gives the administrative access to install COVID lock on this particular device. So it's ransomware for the device. But as a normal user, I'm thinking that this application is going to help me, right? Especially during the pandemic. And to be quite honest, many users, including myself, this is where we're going to get our information. We're going out to the internet and trying to understand what COVID-19 and coronavirus, what it looks like in our neighborhoods, what we can do to minimize, our risk. And this one here it definitely hits home, right? This is in Canada where, we've seen a shift where the adversary is so clever, right? Is that wait a minute, what about if I tell the user that their account has been breached and I'm here to help them, right? So now they're using the aftermath of a breach as a way to entice you to maybe click on something or provide some information. And this one here actually hits home for me specifically because I know somebody very close to me that actually had this happen. And this is where, August 15th, the Canadian government announced that 5,500 CRA accounts were compromised, and they used the credential stuffing attack. So basically what they did was they went and logged, or they breached and got credentials through other breaches and used those credentials to log into CRA. They logged into CRA, they changed the direct deposit information of the accounts, and then they applied for COVID-19, whatever relief, things that are available to Canadians, and had that money deposited into that account, and then got out of there, right? So it's real, right? Work from home and the pandemic has definitely increased our overall risk profile. So we're going to take a step back, as I mentioned, right? We're going to look at this based on a use case, and we're going to look at it from what security wrappers do we think are required. This isn't vendor technology. This is capabilities, right? So we'll look at the internet use case. Don't look when you see the flows, don't look. The cloud is just meaning that this is the flow that we're looking at. But the internet use case will include users going directly to internet or split tunneling. Went the wrong way here, sorry. The next one will be SaaS use case, right? Include users going directly to SaaS-based services using native TLS typically. And then you've got VPN use cases, right? And now this is where you're terminating to a VPN headend as an example. And so we want to think about things like phishing and malware, but also, prevention's awesome. The reality is no matter what technologies you have, how well you cobble them together, the adversary is going to win at times. And so you've got to think about the other side of the equation, right? Do I have the data? Do I have the information I need to be able to determine what actually took place and ultimately build in mechanisms to defeat the adversary moving forward? System hygiene, right? DDoS, direct internet, social engineering, DNS outage, right? Split tunneling. Now, DNS outage is interesting, right? Because you don't think of how critical DNS becomes when you start using SaaS-based services, right? If I can't resolve, can I still get to Office 365? So who you use or what you use for DNS now becomes something that you want to consider. Obviously, inside you would do that. You most likely have your own infrastructure that supports this, but now they're working from home. It may not even be VPN'd in directly into the organization. Credential theft, and we can go on, right? We've talked about many of them. And so this is where I build this out. Right. So now we look at an endpoint and we have a user and they're going to connect and we're going to build out these flows together. Well, it's really going to be me. You're going to be listening, hopefully. But we'll look at it from two lenses, right? I thought about this at first and I thought, you know what, I would break these up because you've got a prevention capability and then you have a detect and respond capability. And so what I've done is, if you can prevent something, that's great. Right? Detection, well, you've already prevented it, so you had to detect. And response, well, you blocked it, right? So there is already somewhat of an inherent response there because you prevented the attack. But I break them up and we'll walk through this together. We've got patching, right? System hygiene. It's still a big thing, right? If we can patch 100% of everything, we'd be in really good shape. But you got to think about that work from home user, right? How are you patching those systems, right? How are you keeping them updated, right? Are you using some management platform internally, using some type of TLS mechanism to secure it? Are you doing it through a VPN connection when they connect? But what happens if they don't connect? What if it's 10 days that they don't connect because they used a SaaS-based service and there wasn't a need to connect to the VPN, right? So these are things that we want to think about. Exploit prevention, right? So now we get into defending your endpoints from things like memory injection, right? And these attacks are commonly seen with malware and 0-day, and they attack unpatched software. And then you get into system protection process, right? So we want to make sure that those system processes are not being attacked by other processes on the system. And again, this is focused on capability, right? I'm not saying this is a technology that you need. It's just a capability that you've got to consider. Advanced malware and AV, right? That's obviously commonplace nowadays. But you want to make sure that you're using something with multi-engine platform or multi-intelligence platform, right? That has different insights into the threat landscape and hopefully different ways of detecting whether or not something malicious is happening. Malicious activity protection. So what happens if, as an example, something does pass your defensive capabilities, right? We know that that's a reality. It's going to happen. And what if it starts encrypting the drive? Just starts to do it, right? Do you have a mechanism maybe to stop that particular process that's invoking something that you deem as malicious, right? So these are, again, things to consider. Application blocking. So again, you might want to make sure that certain applications aren't able to operate on a mobile endpoint, right? No matter where they are. But the other use case, and I've worked with someone recently on this one, is what happens if you have to let somebody go, right? And they're not coming back to the office necessarily, right? And so they've got to ship the laptop, but from the point of when they ship the laptop to when you receive it, you're worried about whether or not there's some localized data on the asset. Now, nobody wants localized data, but do you have controls in place to mitigate against that? That would be a question. So you can use something like app blocking to do something clever, right? So say there was a termination that took place. Obviously, you shut down all the access internally, VPNs, Active Directory, all that magical stuff. But I could also maybe build a policy that says block explorer.exe from launching, right? And so if the user uses the laptop and flips it up, it gets the update, they try to log in, there's no shell, right? The asset becomes unusable at that point in time. So again, being clever with the technologies that you have. Network blocking. So the ability to, block, L3, L4 type controls, right? And again, this doesn't always necessarily have to be on the endpoint. This could be anywhere else. But the way I, some people argue defense in depth, whether it's dead or alive. I do believe that if you have multiple controls and multiple different layers, your success of either defending or making it so difficult for the adversary to be successful that they move on, right? And so, you want to look at this as a multi-prong approach for sure. USB blocking. So this becomes another issue, right? Maybe not an issue that we thought was a big deal when they're on premise, but now off premise, we've got students from home, right? And so people are scrambling to get their children access to laptops and devices. And so maybe, they're using their work laptop. Even if policy suggests otherwise, people tend to, again, want to help their family members and they don't suspect anything risky is going to happen because they don't know computers. And so a student comes in, or the family member that's a student comes in and plugs in a USB device, opens up a PDF. The PDF has malware on it, right? And so you might want to have some controls there to force the data to be in a file repository in the cloud, maybe, or on premise, as opposed to coming in through external devices. Intrusion prevention, I think that's commonplace. Firewalling, right? So you got network blocking based on L3, L4, based on maybe you get some security intelligence to suggest something's bad, and so you just don't want to communicate outbound. And then you've got standard-based firewalling that might be built into the system itself or through an application that you've purchased. You get fileless malware, right? So this is where we get into, again, taking advantage of memory injection and running code in memory and evading. And so exploit prevention and system protection process, those are some elements that are going to help you here, but we've got to consider fileless as well. And then you get into, some more of the buzz terms, right? AI and machine learning. So machine learning is a subset of AI, but machine learning, you've got to have a lot of good data and a lot of bad data in order for those algorithms to really mature. But it's something you want to consider, right, on the endpoint. And so that kind of rounds out prevention. And somebody might have their hand up saying, well, wait, what? Yes, there could be more, there could be less, right? But you get the idea. Really taking that step back. I haven't even talked about what I'm connecting to yet. I'm just talking at the endpoint at this point. These are some of the things that I would consider. These are things that I've been talking to people about over the last, probably 5 months, ever since COVID really started. And then now we move into detect and respond, right? So now you've, buzz terms like endpoint detection and response, right? The ability to understand that a Word document was opened by WinWord and it executed a macro. The macro then reached into PowerShell, reached out to a IP address, pulled down a dropper file, yada, 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 right? The story of what happened. Tremendously valuable, especially now that you don't have access to these resources as much as you did before when they were on premise. Forensic snapshot, right? I need to be able to take a snapshot of that endpoint at any point if there's an incident. Can I do that? What if they're not connected to a VPN? What if they have direct connection to an internet? Can I get the data I need? Again, this could be a very big breach, right? And I need some additional insight. And maybe it all started here. And so I need some insight from that endpoint. Host isolation, right? The ability to be able to minimize the overall risk of that endpoint if it was compromised, right? So once you determine it has been compromised, what do you do, right? Okay, so maybe you have EDR, maybe you can take a forensic snapshot, but can I isolate the host and still, do my investigation, let it have limited access, right? So these are things that we want to consider because VPN isn't going to always be there. Cloud-based IOCs. So again, enhancing the technology or the intelligence stack that you have. And again, based on certain activities and patterns, you might have to flag indications of compromise. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be cloud, but I see the trend moving towards more of that big data, data intelligence, that typically comes from the cloud because it's too big to build on premise. Command line capture. Again, if PowerShell is going to be invoked, I don't only want to know that PowerShell was invoked. I want to know that it was PowerCat minus C 4.4.4.4 minus P444, right? I want to know the exact command line that was, or you're using PowerShell to download a file and start the process. I need to know what that command line that was passed within that application that was used or process that was used. You've got sandboxing and file analysis. Now, I didn't put this as a prevention capability because I feel that sandboxing takes a bit of time to do. And in order to do that, you can't stop an HTTP connection midstream and say, give me 7 to 5 minutes or 5 to 7 minutes to execute this payload in the sandbox environment, come out with a disposition and update you late, right? Before you just can't do that. It's impossible. And so I see this more of an afterthought. So it may have been sandboxed, right? Then you've got to think about, okay, now the disposition is bad. How does it tell the endpoint about the disposition and what does it do with it? But also I need this to be able to do my own analysis, right? If I need to submit a file or review a file that was submitted, I want to know what registry entries, network connections, I want, PCAPs, I want, what behavioral indicators were triggered. I need to know all of that, right? To help understand the full context of the threat that I'm dealing with. And then we move into vulnerable software, right? You can't be successful at patching unless you identify the vulnerable software. Sure, you can do it regular every Tuesday, right? Patch Tuesday. But there's other software that might be on the system that needs to be patched as well. And I want to be able to tie vulnerable software to any breach that might have happened. That's key to me, right? Because if I can mitigate the vulnerability, I essentially break the adversary's ability to be successful. But if I can't tie the threat to the vulnerability, or the breach to the vulnerability, then it's just going to continue to happen. IP fix or network flow data, right, from an endpoint where it ties in the process to the network connectivity that it's making. And so some of you might be sitting on the edge of your chair saying, well, wait a minute, isn't that what endpoint detection and response does? Kinda, right? It does, but it's usually limited to the number of flows per application that it actually tracks. What I'm talking about here is every single application or process that makes a network connection, regardless of any threat, is actually being monitored and tracked. All right, now we've got the endpoint, right? Some people might be saying, well, the endpoint would never run if it had all this stuff on it, right? But you certainly can do that in today's world, right? Agents are becoming thinner and streamlined. There's some things here you can use, a couple of products with. Some are inherently built into the operating system. You just have to expose it. And then others might be, based on vendors that you might deal with, right? But you want to look at that both from a prevention and detection and response perspective. So cool. But before we even connect to any services, there's some other things that we want to consider, like DNS security, right? Again, I told you earlier that now your VPN headend or your SaaS-based services, all of these DNS records that you leverage have to resolve. And if they don't resolve, then that service will be down, disrupting your users. So DNS security becomes not only an ability to make sure that you can resolve services, but also a mechanism to prevent threats, right? DNS is a first line capability when it comes to breaches, right? DNS has to happen before I make a connection. And so it gives me an opportunity to cut it off sooner in the attack chain. Web proxy, right? You might want to have proxy. Why? Well, now you want to run additional inspections against that payload. If you're waiting for the endpoint to catch it, because you might be saying, well, wait a minute, you could say DLP, TLS decryption and advanced malware. Well, wait a minute, I have that here, right? So why do I need it here, right? It's going to see it here. I'm a big believer that if you wait for the endpoint to solve the problem, right, to solve the breach, it's always too late. In my mind, that's not where you want to defend, right? Now, you have to defend there. That's a reality because you can't trust the other controls that you have elsewhere are going to be 100% every single time. And so you need something at the endpoint. But if I had it in my mind where I want to defend as far away from the asset I'm protecting as possible. And so web proxy allows us now to do DLP. We can start thinking about TLS decryption, more specifically around, TLS 1.3 and some of the implications that are caused there around decryption. And then I could do advanced malware inspection. And then I transition from the prevention side to, okay, what are the other things that I would require? So thinking about this is DNS forensics, right? That this becomes tremendously valuable, again, determining not only about what took place, but also maybe understanding the attack infrastructure, right? That is being leveraged. So DNS forensics becomes highly critical. Full URI capture. So if you are doing proxy or the need for proxy exists, having that full URI is certainly helpful. Sandbox and file analysis, it's a proxy connection. And so if you've got a sandbox, it's HTTP, you can't keep that connection open forever. And so, you've got to do the sandbox and file analysis, very much the same as what we talked about on the endpoint. And now we move into the internet connectivity, right? And so this internet connectivity might be a little bit more open here, right? Because they're not coming to a VPN headend or a SaaS-based service. Now, in this case, I'm showing email like it would be a SaaS-based service. And I'm not really focused on that side of it today, but you also have to look at that. If this is web conferencing, as an example, you've got to think about, is it secure? Is it encrypted? Where does the data reside? Like, these are all things you got to think about on the services side, especially if you're exposing it like you've never done before. And I used email as an example here, and I'll continue that theme moving forward. So we only have to walk through this once. But you've got reputation filtering, right? Spam, business email compromise, advanced malware, protection again, right? Like you might be saying, well, wait a minute, it's already here, right? Well, yes, but if I can block the attachment from ever the user clicking on it, I want to do that, right? And so here's an opportunity for me to extend that capability here and prevent much sooner in the attack chain. Gray mail, phishing, right? Anybody that's done anything around email security, knows these are fairly common capabilities that would exist today in any mature email security offering. And so URL protection is another one. And so some people, and I've heard this comment, talking with many people across the West, is why do I need URL protection here at the email level? Because when I click it, isn't that DNS going to do a DNS lookup? And then I got this web proxy capability. You're right, it does, right? But if I can actually defang it in an email so nobody clicks on it, I don't have to worry about whether their DNS security had intelligence to know it was bad, right? I was already able to mitigate that risk. Or maybe I redirect that maybe for proxy as an example. You've got sandboxing. Now you notice I didn't say sandboxing and file analysis. I've left file analysis both for detect and respond. Sandboxing I included here as a prevention capability. Because email is never, instant, you have an opportunity here to hold email for a little bit longer. And therefore, you could run it through a sandbox, get the disposition back before you ever send it to the user itself. DLP, right? And then you get into some of the forensic pieces, right? The detect and respond, right? Message tracking. I want to know everything about the message. File analysis, right? I want to know behavioral indicators. Again, it's more of the same. So that's email, right? On the services side. So we won't do that again, although the theme will carry for VPN and SaaS, right? But you get the idea of the process that you want to go through when you're building out your overall security posture. And you have the opportunity to do this, right? Now, this isn't too late. You might say, well, we've already got things in play. Great. Figure out what you need, figure out where the gaps are, and address them, right? There is an opportunity still to make the organization more secure. So now we get into VPN, right? Again, this is not a termination point, right? So don't say, well, shouldn't this be here, right? No, it doesn't matter. This is the flow, right? You've got all kinds of different controls wherever. So DDoS, right? Again, now we know it might not be volumetric type attacks, although they still exist. And you can use scrubbing stations, et cetera, to be able to, offload that volumetric attack into the cloud as an example. But now you've got service-focused impacting DDoS capabilities, and now they're trying to take down your VPN service. Why? Because they know that now you're going to be running, maybe you're running at 80% from work from home. I can drop that down where it's very difficult for you to operate. TLS decryption. Again, if I'm doing network-based inspection here, right, I'm going to need to do TLS decryption, right? Or else malware and IPS, all of that stuff becomes, I'm blind to it, right? And again, I know some might be sitting there saying, well, TLS here, it's open here, TLS here, TLS here, lots of yes, there is. Again, I want to prevent, as far away from the individual I'm protecting. And so if I have an opportunity to block advanced malware here, even if this was going to catch it, I want it blocked here. Again, if this fails, I need this capability to hopefully catch it. And again, the green stuff, right? All this stuff here is key in case you do get breached. All right, so you got multi-factor authentication, you got endpoint posture, right? Geo control. You might not think that that's much of a control, but it certainly is something that layers on the complexity that the adversary has to overcome, right? They've got to now proxy and take other methods. You've got L7 firewalls, right? Now we're getting into application control. And again, that might be shifted to an endpoint, right? Or in the cloud. but it could be a network-based device as well that's more traditional. You have IPS, you have advanced malware inspection, behavioral-based policy, like the ability to be able to understand that this is a critical asset, it's talking to a critical resource, I have this software version on it, and there's an indication of compromise, right? So I maybe on all those factors want this to be a certain impact level so I can actually address it. Then you get into web application firewalling. You got device insight, denied authentications, right? Host profiling, impact analysis, sandbox and file analysis, right? So impact analysis and host profiling are key. And the reason why they're key is that if you don't understand the asset you're protecting, how do you understand the impact of the threat that's coming in? And so those two work together, right? But these are things that you want to consider, whether you use it in the platform that's being offered or you try to figure out a mechanism to do it externally. Vulnerability insight, again, if I know the vulnerabilities that are being targeted, I can get them patched. In the meantime, maybe use IPS signatures to minimize my risk here. You got flow analytics, event packet capture, and then you've got event workflow, right? So this is the ability to pivot and understand what the threat looks holistically, right? From end to end ultimately. And then you get into the application, right? And again, so SaaS-based, there's a couple here. I'm going to move because I'm already getting the 10-minute warning. So multi-factor authentication, right? For a SaaS-based service, right? We'd also want multi-factor, as I mentioned, for VPN, right? Or any other service that we're offering. The more critical the service, obviously, the more critical multi-factor becomes. Endpoint posture, I want to understand the endpoint, right? Before it's connecting to that SaaS-based geo-control, we've already covered that. You've got restrict non-sanctioned applications, right? So applications that, for example, if you have OneDrive and that's your file repository, what about Dropbox, Box, and all the other file repositories the user can still get to? Remember, they're not plugged into the network and they're not going through maybe a next-gen firewall that's doing application control, right? They might be driving this because they're directly connected to the internet and using that SaaS-based service. So we want to make sure that that data is not being moved over. You've got SaaS-based DLP as well. And then you get into device insight, denied authentications, right? I want to know if multi-factor fails, then there's a good indication that a credential was stolen, right? Because they got to the second factor and it failed. Shadow IT and community trust rating. So the ability to understand the applications my users are using in the cloud and figure out whether or not these should be moved to sanctioned applications. User identity behavior analytics. If I log in Edmonton to Salesforce and then an hour later I log into Office 365 from maybe the continent of Africa or whatever, right? If I've logged in there, I can't be in those two places very quickly. And so I need something to tie that together to let me know that that actually took place. And there's risk. And then you have the service at the end, right? So whatever it is, email, web, some web type platform, doesn't really matter, Salesforce, et cetera, right? You've got to think about the security wrappers for that application as well. Not only within the app, right? As Tanya was mentioning, right? The applications need to be secure, but also anything that's supporting around that application, right, as well. And so this is now what you end up with, right? So this looks a little bit more interesting. Now I have a better picture of what I need, and now I need to figure out what are the controls or what are the technologies that are going to help satisfy these needs. But it doesn't stop there, right? I think that's understanding the controls and the ability to detect and respond in case of failure of those controls. But then we've got to think about what happens in incident response and threat hunting. That user might be mobile, right? They're not connected. They're directly connected to the internet and maybe not VPN'd in. So how do I hunt, right, for threats? And so, lots of people are building data lakes. Data lakes are very expensive to do, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but if you're not down that path, what you want to be able to do is hopefully leverage some API-based platform that can actually query the technologies you own and provide you insight and hopefully visuals of what that threat looks end to end, right? So I should be able to say, I know that this is bad. This is an indicator. It's a SHA, an IP, whatever. Ask the platform questions And it tells me, I've saw it in an email attachment with this subject. I've seen a DNS request go to this domain, and I've saw something on the endpoint. And I'd like that all tied together and show the relationships between them. And then you've got orchestration and automation. So the ability to be able to orchestrate and automate some of this, right? So building out playbooks becomes key, right? And even if you haven't done this, and I've got an example here that you guys can see in the PDF version that I'll share with BSides later, but it walks through going through the incident response consortium, and you grab phishing and you walk through phishing, you build out the playbooks that's meaningful for your organization, but you got to think, how can I automate some of this stuff? Like if I see a phishing link come in, wouldn't it be cool if I can say, okay, abstract those observations, query the rest of my technologies, tell me the results of all of that based on my environment, right? And also then take a forensic snapshot, move the asset into isolation, create a conference room with the right incident responders so they can collaborate, and potentially take action, right? Additional action on that threat. And so maybe that's for some a longer term strategy, but when you're building out these, you have to be thinking of these as well. And then you've got threat intelligence that's going to support all of this, right? Whether that be third party, in-house, outsourced, doesn't really matter. The intelligence comes in, and so can I use these platforms to be able to feed that new information into to provide prevention capabilities, and then also be able to query that data as needed for incident response. And so I'm coming up to the end here. I've included this just to be complete here. So I'm not going to walk through it in full. But if you're not aware of IRC, not IRC chat, right? But IRC is the Incident Response Consortium. Check it out, right? They've got tons and tons of community-based playbooks that have been developed, and you can grab them, download them, and modify them, right? There's no restrictions that I've seen, and I've worked with a lot of organizations, that universities as an example, that certainly leverage this site to help build out some of their playbooks. And so you got to prepare, right? You got to get the right teams together. You've got to review, maintain a timeline, and you might have some interviews, and you're going to have some, an internal path, and you document that in an external path. Then you're going to get into detect, right? So what is it that we're actually looking for? What are the threat indicators, right? We need to understand those and then kind of develop them, right? Like emails that are non-returnable or non-deliverable, right? Or emails that have been linked to an external or unknown URL, right? And so these are my indicators, and I need to categorize those, request maybe packet capture, conduct content scans. Now think about these elements too when you're doing the playbook. Are these manual? Can you automate this, right? These are things that I would want to do, right? I don't want my team focused on trying to capture and pull all the data, right? They're too smart for that. I want my team focused on analyzing having the human element, right? Let the technology do all the weeding out of all the noise, but I need my humans to be able to look at it, understand the context of the threat based on the business, and be able to come to the determination to understand the risk to my organization. Analyze it, right? We need to then define the risk factors, right? Log collection, evidence collection, data capture, etc. Then we move into contain. We want to contain it, right? So how are we going to do that, right? Servers, desktops, our credentials stolen, right? What other services are impacted? Again, here's a nice list of elements that you want to consider. Almost done, Harv. Eradicate, triage, and confirm incident report, right? And ultimately eradicate the malware. That's the goal. And then recover those systems, incident remediation. And this one here, post-incident handling, although the others are very important, this one I think is critical, right? It's at the end. Everything's been done. Now you need to go back and revisit, right? And learn from that. Make sure that you're applying those lessons and you're adapting your processes to accommodate the things that you've learned during that incident. And so again, you've got to think about the use case, what you're trying to secure, and build that out with a longer term strategy in mind, right? You might not be able to get there day one, but you want to build towards something, and building it out based on flow is going to help you identify what you require in order to be successful. And that's it. And yes, it's anonymous, but I like it.
Oh yeah, awesome presentation again. You nailed it. um, Thank you for
Thanks,
that. So I have one question from the audience. The question is this: for work from home during COVID-19 times, what is the best strategy tips for security awareness training for end users who are already under stress?
So sorry, say that again, Harv. I kind of so users are under stress. They're already working from home.
Yeah. What's the best strategy for security awareness training, like, who's already under stress, working from home user? So that's the question.
So restraining? I'm sorry, I'm missing
the security awareness
strategy.
Security.
Oh, sorry, I gotcha. It could be that latency on my side, Harv. Yeah, so I think security awareness training is key, right? It's more than ever because again, many of these users aren't used to it. So there's lots of different platforms out there that'll actually go through and grade them and test them, and it's not. They don't feel like they're being, graded in the sense like in school, right? It's almost more like playful type training exercises that you can go through, right? And it's not something like you're bad. It's like you're fantastic and we're only getting better. But there is a lot of platforms out there that you could leverage for security awareness training.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jason. Once again, you are the one and only person who are here for 3 years in the row, consecutively. So I think we have to plan this to bring you every year. So yeah, so we will be taking break and we will be back at 1 p.m. So I will encourage everyone to please visit the sponsor booths in expo section. There are prizes and some draws are kind of brought by the sponsors. So please visit them. Thank you.